Okay, David Pakman, the truth about China. I want to know the truth about China. I want David Pakman to tell me the truth about China. Let's see.
Let's go next to Audrey from Georgia. Audrey, you are on the air.
Hi, David. I believe we've talked before. I studied Chinese in college, and I was talking with my Chinese professor yesterday.
Now,
And I
I'm
came to the
sorry to interrupt. Did you study Mandarin or Cantonese?
Mandarin,
Ah, okay, good.
and I came to the conclusion that I think China is a little bit like kind of. I think we treat them very biased in our media and especially in our education. And I wanted to get your take on that. Do you think?
Look, I just want to note before going through here that if you live in an English-speaking settler colonial country that had a huge wave of Chinese migration in the 19th, early 20th century, you absolutely are biased against Chinese people. It's embedded into your society, into your education system, all of it. You're from countries that have demonized Chinese people for 200, 150 years. Just like anything else is systemic, this is going to be systemic too. Now, that's not to say that all of you are racist or anything, but if you don't think about this and question it, it's very easy for you to end up being racist or being biased because you're more inclined to believe like utterly stupid shit about China than you would be otherwise. Because you have this pre-existing idea of like what they're like they're like fucking automatons. Honestly, East Asian people are commonly thought of by like the average like 80 IQ white American as like unthinking automatons who just do what the leader says.
I think that China, in many ways, is sort of like demonized in our media. Like, if you look in the news, it's always something bad about them. There's never any reports on like the good things going on in there, like scientific research and everything.
Yeah, I would
What's your
generally speaking agree that there is I mean, listen, China is an economic adversary. There is no question about that. But they're also an economic partner, and that's what makes this so complex. On the one hand, we have an economy that for decades has been based on being able to get cheap stuff from China. That's what it is. If we didn't get cheap stuff from China and we couldn't quickly get it elsewhere, and had to bring all production domestically, we'd be buying American, as some people say, but things would cost dramatically more. And what I see is an asymmetry in if we want to recognize China as an economic adversary and along with Russia up there with the US as being in a battle to be the major of the three major superpowers, that's fine. That's accurate. I have no problem identifying China in that way. But so many of the people who wildly talk about China virus and intellectual property theft and this stuff seem to not know or recognize.
I mean, yeah, the US and China are like economically linked, but and yeah, what he said about Russia makes no sense. Russia is not nowhere near on the same level as those two, but China virus, in complaining about intellectual property theft, etc. That shit is nothing. The China virus shit is a racist conspiracy theory. Complaining about intellectual property theft is stupid. You should steal intellectual property. Now, you can steal my intellectual property and I'll sue you for it, but you should do it anyway. Okay? There's nothing wrong with stealing IP. I don't give a shit. There's nothing wrong with that, but I'll still sue you for it. Okay? Because I want money. I want your cash. I want to bleed you dry for re-uploading one of my videos.
That our entire way of life, including the purchasing power that we have, is based on the fact that we get so much of our products from China. And I think it would be great to have a more balanced perspective on that.
All right. And I was more talking about also like in education, very few people in the United States seem to know anything about like the politics or the general like daily life.
This is like what I was talking about earlier, right? Like people in the US and other countries conceive of China is like 1984. For them, like people in China wake up in like a fucking pod like the workers from Squid Game. And like a robotic voice is like, thank you, worker 431 for waking up today. Please head now in a perfect synchronized line to your workstation where you will work until 8 p.m., at which point you will return to your dormitory until the next day. Like China is a place where people live normally just like you every single day. Until the average person can conceive of China in a basic, realistic way, all of the propaganda is going to be bought hook, line, and sinker no matter what.
Of what it's like for people in China. They just see it as
That's
sort
not
of this
super surprising, though. That it's very common that people in the United States also know very little about the lives of people in Russia or in Japan or in Denmark. Now, you could say, well, China's more important to know about for the reasons you're laying out, but it's not surprising that U.S.
But yeah, but those countries don't have fucking
Education.
propaganda every single day saying like China bad, China evil. Everyone in China lives under, like how I just said, like in fucking Squid Game. Oh, no, be scared, be afraid. They're coming for you. They want to invade the USA. They're going to do it tomorrow. Look out. That's basically what the problem is, you know? Yeah, the US, people in the US don't know shit about the everyday life in Denmark, but they're also not fed propaganda every single day about how everyone in Denmark is a fucking automaton who's being controlled by Big Brother, okay?
At least at the K through 12 level is very U.S. centric.
I mean, like in U.S. education, we learn all about how the Japanese and British parliament and everything works, but there's absolutely no involvement in how other countries, such as like how Russia's or how China's politics work. And I think it's something important that we need to recognize if we're going to have those important political discussions all over the news about, you know, like China getting rid of term limits or anything. If you're going to understand that, you have to have at least a basic knowledge of how it works.
I agree with you. I agree with you completely. Audrey, thank you for the call.
You're welcome.
I mean, that was like a nothing call. Let's look at his China segment from this other video. Legitimate reasons to criticize China. Might be more interesting.
We got a call from a viewer last week who brought up China and a discussion of the portrayal of China in American media. And during that conversation, during that phone call,
So this is like the sequel to that call, I guess. Honestly, that call was nothing. David kind of dodged the issue, which was the media and sort of societal treatment of China, and didn't really get to the brunt of it, which is the media biased or not? He didn't admit anything about that. He just said there's not enough education about it.
we talked about xenophobia towards Asian Americans over COVID. We talked about intellectual property theft and a few other topics. And I got a very good email from Thomas over the weekend. And Thomas said to me, you know, David, there is a China story to talk about, but it's not really what the caller brought up. Intellectual property theft, it's an issue. It's not the major geopolitical issue with China. There's no real evidence that China intentionally released COVID as a bioweapon. So that's not really like the big story with China. Yes, xenophobia against Asian Americans for real or perceived misdeeds by China is something we should be against. We're not going to be xenophobic against Asian Americans because of something the Chinese government did. That's happening and that's bad. But Thomas wrote, there are real issues with the Chinese Communist Party. Now, that's another issue to clarify. The CCP and China, as in Chinese people, are two different things. We're really talking about the Chinese.
One thing that I've noticed a lot in the last year or two is that people who are like this will never, ever, 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 ever talk about very similar issues to what they complain about in China, in the US, and in other allied nations, except to use as a deflection for their criticism of China. So they will talk about China 24/7. And like, if you say, hey, it's kind of weird that you talk about China so much, but you live in the US, which is far worse on this and this and this, all the same things that you talk about China about all the time. And they will say, oh yeah, that's bad too. Anyway, let's get back to talking about China. Or they'll just say, oh, that's whataboutism. Let's get back to talking about China. But the fact of the matter is, it's not whataboutism. It's simply showing that the thing that you purport to care about, you don't actually care about, and you're just kind of trying to delegitimize a geopolitical enemy. And it's very easy to see. Like someone like Vorsh, for example, he's like, China bad, China bad, China bad. How often does someone like Vorsh actually talk about US imperialism, which is much worse and a much more pressing issue for the international left? How often does he talk about it? Practically never. He might like talk about China and say, the US does this too, by the way, and then go back to talking about China. And that's what's going to happen here, right? At best. They might say, oh, the US does this too. Anyway, China bad, China terrible, we should invade them.
Government, the Chinese Communist Party. And as Thomas wrote to me, there's a ton of negativity towards China in general that's very surface level. Some of it is based in plain old bigotry. Some of it is peddled by US media. But there are many real reasons to be at odds with the actions of the Chinese Communist Party. So
I mean, there's many reasons to be at odds with the fucking American Democratic Party too. The problem is that these people aren't at odds with the American Democratic Party, but they are at odds with the Chinese Communist Party. You know, at least have some sort of fucking consistency. At least pretend to care about the things you pretend to care about.
Let's look at the real concerns with the Chinese government, the CCP, And these are not reasons to go to war with China. Caveat, I'm not suggesting war. I know that there's people possibly on the revolutionary left who will see this segment and say, I'm calling for another American military intervention. No, I'm not even saying these are reasons to no longer trade with China. If we stop trading with China, it would be disastrous for the American economy as it's currently set up. We're just going to talk about issues with the Chinese government. First, the ongoing Uyghur genocide. Uyghurs are a Muslim.
Ongoing Uyghur genocide. These people who talk about this have literally no idea of what's even going on there. I've gone over this topic so much, I'm not going to go over it again. This is exactly what we're talking about with the media bias, right? Like, he just takes whatever the media says as is. Like 1 million billion Uyghurs in camps. If there was something resembling a genocide, it was a cultural genocide and it was at its peak more than a year ago now. But he says, he clearly doesn't think that. He's like the ongoing Uyghur genocide. This is exactly what the last caller meant. You don't know what you're talking about, but you're still very happy to talk about it authoritatively in order to attack a US enemy government.
Ethnic minority in China. China has been credibly accused of committing crimes against humanity, possibly genocide against the Uyghur population and other mostly Muslim ethnic groups in the northwest region of Xinjiang. Leading human rights groups include.
I'd love to see him talk about the fact how this exact same thing happened in the US literally 100 times over. But it's okay because it's in the past. I'm not going to do anything about it, but it's okay because it's in the past.
Including Amnesty and Human Rights Watch have put out reports accusing China of crimes against humanity for their actions. There are re-education camps, there are horrifying things, and much has been written about it.
Literally just takes everything for granted. He's exactly the sort of person who the last caller was talking about.
That's a real substantive issue with the Chinese government. Second, organ harvesting. This is
again, organ harvesting. The organ harvesting claims are literally invented by the fucking Falun Gong cult. There's absolutely no material evidence that any organs have ever been harvested, at least not in the way they claim.
If you put a positive spin on it, this is, we get organ donations from prisoners who have died of natural causes. That's the story that China would tell. But a tribunal.
That's not the story that what China told. What the story that China told was that executed prisoners were automatically considered organ donors, and that was abolished like 5 to 10 years ago.
Tribunal ruled in 2020 that China is forcibly
Who ruled? Who ruled? Who are these people?
That's the story that China would tell. But a tribunal ruled in.
A tribunal? It's literally a fucking tribunal set up by the Falun Gong in order to make a ruling of what they wanted the tribunal to say. It's no one.
2020 that China.
It's the Organization for World Peace. What's the Organization for World Peace? It's fucking nothing. They don't even have a wiki. They have an everybody wiki, not an actual wiki. It's an NGO founded in 2014 that has a podcast and writes advocacy letters. Like, I don't fucking care about what the Organization for World Peace says completely unsourced about organ transplants in China. This is not a source. This is what I'm talking about. These people do not fucking have any sort of capacity for critical analysis of their sources. They don't ask questions like, well, where does this come from? Where is the proof of this supposedly systemic organ harvesting? Let's go to this website, the Organization for World Peace. There's no source in the entire article. The China Tribunal. The tribunal, which was initiated by the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China. What's that? I'm telling you right now, this is almost certainly a Falun Gong front. But I'm not sure if they're going to actually reveal that fact. Independent, non-partisan organization. The fact that they specifically mention we are not aligned with any party, religious or spiritual group makes it obvious that they're a Falun Gong front. Let's see if there's any information about their funding or whatever. It's literally an NGO registered in Australia to Susie Hughes. Who is Susie Hughes? I don't fucking know. It's like the education and empowerment of the victim community is primarily Falun Gong. Completely non-transparent people. Michelle Nigan. Who is Michelle Nigan? The only mentions of Michelle Nigan are on the Falun Gong's Australia website. Here she is, speaking at a Falun Gong rally. This is the director of the supposedly non-partisan, non-aligned with any sort of group tribunal, which is apparently an objective source on the fact that China is doing systemic organ harvesting of Falun Gong prisoners. This lady who speaks at Falun Gong rallies, proudly standing in front of Falun Gong banners. David Pakman and other people like him, I beg you, I beg you, think critically, learn to critique sources, look into where these claims come from and what evidence is backing them. You read a headline that fits with what you want to believe, China bad, and you will take it as fact without thinking about it at all. Michelle Nyan, what else? Who else? What about Robin Clay Williams? Epoch Times. Robin Clay Williams has only ever been cited on another Falun Gong website, the Epoch Times. They're not associated with the Falun Gong, but everything about them, everything that they have ever done is associated with the Falun Gong. Give me a fucking break. It's obvious, totally obvious, that this is just the Falun Gong front. Financial report. Check out the financial report. $30,000 profit. Where's the money come from? Receipts from customers. All of their money comes from receipts from customers. So I guess they don't have to list that donors because of that. Isn't it weird how everything about this group seems to be designed to make it so that you can't find out where the money's coming from, and that its directors are directly associated with the Falun Gong and who have only ever been mentioned on the Falun Gong's websites? There you go. That's thinking critically for you. That's analyzing sources. And Pakman's just like, a tribunal. I don't give a fuck about a tribunal. Doesn't mean anything. It's clearly just a tribunal made by the Falun Gong to affirm like their ridiculous claim that they've held for decades upon decades at this point, with no proof whatsoever.
China is forcibly harvesting organs from prisoners who certainly didn't volunteer to donate organs, but it goes even further, possibly even prisoners who were killed for organs, not who
Well, possibly. It could be true. It might not be true. Possibly.
have died naturally. The number of transplant centers in China has gone up over 300%. Wait times for organs have come down dramatically.
He's taking all of this from that one article on a Falun Gong front website based on a report from a tribunal made by the Falun Gong to affirm what they already believe, to affirm what they've been saying for a very long time with absolutely no real evidence. Amazing.
It's not clear why. China doesn't have much in terms of an organized organ donation program. How has it happened? It seems this is a likely explanation, and it is absolutely horrifying. Note that back in 2012, a top Chinese official said China is going to phase out the practice of taking organs from prisoners who have been executed. As of 2020, we believe that that's still going on, even if it's not. Aside from executed,
Who's we?
There's a lot of other ways that you can accelerate the process of obtaining organs from prisoners. It seems that that's being done. Absolutely horrifying.
It seems that that's being done based on what? You've literally done nothing. Like, this is what I said earlier. At the very beginning of this segment, I said people in countries like the US, Australia, Canada, etc. are primed to accept whatever ridiculous thing that they hear about China and Chinese people because they conceive of them as like unthinking barbarians, like really weird, unthinking others. So he's willing to just extrapolate from this one article talking about how China stopped harvesting organs from executed prisoners 10 years ago, that they're still doing it and they've expanded it somehow for some reason based on nothing. The reason that he's so willing to accept this based on nothing is because of that ingrained bias that he has. As an American liberal who believes in American exceptionalism and American hegemony, even people who don't believe in those things still have to work to overcome this ridiculous, complete lack of critical thought. And it also takes like 10 times more effort to debunk these things than it does for them to just throw out the claims. As well, as I just kind of show, I had to like go through like 4 or 5 different layers of websites to find the information about who are the people who run this organization. So it's kind of a losing battle, but at the end of the day, it's easy to show that they're wrong and explain to them why they're wrong, but they're never going to confront that. Anyway, let's continue.
Number 3, China so poorly mismanages its own infrastructure that it likely has led to hundreds or more Chinese people, it's hard to get real numbers from the CCP, to die due to flooding. And the idea here is that, yes, there have been heavy rainstorms that are not man-made, right? Humans didn't make the rainstorms, but there are serious allegations that the deaths are a result of this infrastructure madness craze in China where money is poured into projects.
I mean, that's so weird. This same exact thing happens all over the world. It happens in the US. How many people died in fucking Texas recently due to fucking mass blackouts? What, weren't there floods recently in fucking New York? Didn't people like living in basements literally drown? But he singles out China for things that happens in his own country that he doesn't talk about.
That look good, sometimes generate returns for people. But meanwhile, simple infrastructure.
He's basically like trying to attack the notion of state-led infrastructure projects here
that could be improved to prevent senseless death from heavy rains and people drowning are ignored. Okay, complete mismanagement. That's a real criticism of what's being done. And
I want to talk about mismanagement, man. Look at the USA if you want to talk about infrastructure mismanagement.
then such corruption from the CCP.
Such corruption. Proof?
that causes all sorts of problems. Massive fraud, embezzlement around these half-finished villages where people make a ton of money. The projects are abandoned after the contracts and the cash are handed out, as well as reconstruction projects that never really happen, although many people get...
Tofu Dregs village erected in southwest China to gouge government for compensation. So this sounds like people built fake houses. No, they built fake houses on land that the government was planning to redevelop in order to gouge the government for compensation. And somehow this is the fault of the Chinese government. This is the source for the corruption of the Chinese government here. People trying to scam the government. Read the title. I'm not kidding you. That's what it says. To gouge government for compensation. Here's proof of Chinese government corruption. And I'm sure Chinese government corruption exists and that it would be very easy to find reputable proof of that. But he's so dumb that he's trying to present people trying to gouge the government for compensation as Chinese government corruption. God, man, come on. Critical thought. Get it into your brain.
rich from them. And then lastly, and this is a really big deal, China's continued aggressive posturing towards India, Taiwan, and the South and East China Seas more generally, each of which we've talked about a little bit in the past. So,
buddy, add all that together. Add all that together. For one, China's border dispute with India it's not a dispute that has one side that's right and one side that's wrong. It's a dispute between two regional powers. And it's practically impossible to say that one side has a better claim than the other in this case. It's essentially meaningless land. So to denounce China for this and not India shows whose side you're on. For two, what China does in the South China Sea, aside from what it does to Taiwan, which is a lot more justifiable. Yeah, what China does in the South China Sea is very bad. But it's nowhere near on the level of the US imperialism that you're not going to see fucking David Pakman ever talk about. Illegally, immorally laying claim to waters that aren't theirs. Is that as bad as invading Iraq and causing the deaths of 500,000 plus people? No, it's not. Is it a problem? Yes. Is it a problem on the level of US imperialism? No.
India, there have been somewhere between 4 and 10 skirmishes of note between India and China over the border, various face-offs. We've talked about it a little bit on the bonus show before. The situation in the South China Sea involving China, the Philippines, and Vietnam, where you see military activity by China, naval maneuvers, other aggression, outposts being built, concerning. And then also conflicts with Japan.
Concerning.
And in the East China Sea, other...
Like, the one with Vietnam and the Philippines is certainly China is the aggressor, but, like, he just, like, frames these as if every single thing about them is simply China bad. You know, there's no other parties to this. There's no one else has ever escalated tensions. No one else has ever done anything objectionable. Japan, never done anything objectionable to China. India, never done anything objectionable to China. Never been in the wrong on any of their conflicts.
Part of the sea, it includes Japan having scrambled jets in the past and other escalations. So to be clear, again, I want to be really careful. I don't want war with China. I'm not saying invade China. I'm not saying the U.S. doesn't also do bad things. Lots of countries.
Oh, the U.S. also does bad things, but you curiously never talk about them. I wonder why that is. I wonder why, as I said earlier in this very clip, the U.S. doing bad things is only ever brought up as a cover to be like, yeah, the U.S. does bad things, but for now we're talking about China, and then they never actually talk about the bad things that the U.S. does. And it's obvious why.
Countries exhibit this type of aggression. The difference is, number one, a lot of the criticisms of China in the U.S. media and from, people like Trump have been very surface level and lead to xenophobia against Asian Americans, which has no place whatsoever. There are actual horrible things being done by the Chinese government. Many countries that also want to do horrible things don't have both the aggression and the means to.
The US does on 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 times worse level. Want to talk about that, David?
Carry it out, the financial resources at their disposal, the massive population that China has. Bigotry against Asian Americans because of this or Chinese people anywhere is wrong and we're against it. I'm also not saying cut off China from an economic standpoint. Our economy is now too intertwined with China's. It would take a really long time to be able to unentangle that relationship without destroying the American economy. So I'm not calling for that, but there are real geopolitical issues here.
What are you calling for then? What are you calling for? He clearly wants the US to do something. The US, the world's country that has the least moral authority to do something. What is that something? I want to know.
Humanitarian issues about which we should be concerned. It's not bigotry to talk about that. And the American media rarely touches these actual issues.
It is bigotry. I went over why his perception of China, why his willingness to accept anything bad that he hears about China uncritically is specifically due to his ingrained bigotry. It's a simple fact.
Issues. Let me know what you think. We'll have more on this story on the David Pakman Show Instagram, which you can find at
Yeah, I think I'm fine without the David Pakman Show Instagram. Anyway, to conclude, yeah, David Pakman, you have all of the bias that caller accused you and other people in the US mainstream media, and you are the mainstream media, no doubt about it. You parrot the mainstream media exactly on everything. You have all the same biases that the average person socialized growing up in America has against China, and that all of the mainstream media in the US has against China. Does that mean that China does not do bad things? No, it doesn't. But you're incredibly willing to accept that they do bad things, or like far exaggerated bad things, often things that there's no proof that even happen at all, purely based on an innate bias that you have that is essentially the same as the yellow peril of 100 years ago. There you go.